Welcome to another episode of the Way of BJJ podcast, where we talk to interesting people about everything Jiu-Jitsu related. So please leave us a 5-star review, as that really motivates us to keep on creating these awesome contents. And we're also currently looking for sponsors. So just imagine that this is where I will be telling people to buy your shit. So as always, please do not listen to this podcast around your kids, as there are foul languages, highly inappropriate analogies, and it's just gonna be a bad day for you. So let's get to the podcast. All right, brother, we're live.
Nice.
Well, not live, we're live for the fucking podcast. So, yeah, Darcy is right. This is kind of like that between two ferns.
Oh, totally. Totally.
I think this is the first where our podcast actually feels like we are in like a production studio, with the seats and everything. Dude, this is awesome.
Right, we made a little mini stage. We're all
Nice,
set.
man. Yeah, well, thanks again for the invitation to come out and train with you guys before the podcast, and then graciously lending me your time to do a podcast today on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon.
Of course. Yeah, it was great training. Got to wear you out so they can take it easy on me. There we go.
Well, you have accomplished your goal, man, dude. That was some really good rounds with you, with Kenny, Darcy, Bao, Jasmine, was it? Jamie.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck, okay.
There you go.
There you go, man. There you go. This won't be the only fuck up during this
Yeah.
conversation. Because I hope you know what you got yourself into, Kabir.
Oh, I'm ready.
Yeah, my podcast is known for being unfiltered, unedited. Anything goes. I don't take anything out. So whatever you say, whatever answer and reaction I get out of you, it's gonna be staying in forever.
Love it. I love high stakes. Let's do
High
it.
stakes, man. Nice, man. Thank you. So so this is my good friend and buddy Kabir, and he's I'll let you do the introduction, man. Yeah, introduce yourself, man.
Yeah, so I'm Kabir Bath. I run Kaboom BJJ just outside of Surrey, or just in Surrey, just outside of Vancouver.
Outside of Surrey.
I'm a black belt under Lovato Jr. I'm sort of the head of that association as well, so I promote with that. We have almost 40 schools around the world now in the Lovato Association. And then Kaboom here, we're really known for the work we do with our youth. We have usually around 300 youth students at any given time. Have about 100 adults, and one thing that lately has been really interesting has been our conversion to all the way, just make our whole school sort of games-based eco style. Yeah, there we go.
Awesome, man.
That's my rundown.
Nice. So this is why I want you to introduce yourself. This proves my theory that you've been doing this podcast circuit so long that you know what to say and how to introduce yourself.
There we go.
And that's exactly what I want to fucking avoid today. So because I was doing my homework, I was listening to some of the podcasts that you did recently, right? Recently on MMA Primal Coaching or whatever.
Yeah, Primal MMA
Right, there's
Coaching was one.
Sonny Brown one,
Yeah.
right? Elbows Tight,
Yep.
right? Just to name a few. I think there's a couple more I missed.
Yep, for sure.
Right. But I think what ends up happening when you go on so many podcasts in a short amount of time is that the stuff they ask you is probably pretty similar, right? It's either about your business, how successful your kids' programs are, right? What is it like to switch to completely eco approach, right? And then I find that then your answer becomes more rehearsed, right? Because somebody as smart as you think about what you say sometimes, right? So I'm thinking more like I would still love to talk about those, during the podcast, but I'm more interested in finding out who really is Kabir.
Nice.
Yeah, because I don't think anybody has given a shit about who you are or what.
True. Single tier.
I know,
Single
right?
tier.
Yeah, man. Yeah, because I think Way of BJJ is really about the human story, Yeah, there's a Facebook page called Humans of New York.
Right.
Right? And then it's sometimes the stories are like the most mundane type of things, but when you read it, you relate to it, right? And then you can't help but cheer for that person, right? Whatever the story might be, right?
For sure.
So I'm really interested to find out about that. So can you tell me about the origin stories of Kabir?
Yeah. As it relates to jiu-jitsu,
Anything, man. Anything. What was your earliest memory?
my earliest memory as a
fuck yeah.
human, bro,
yeah, man.
falling down some stairs in India on like
shit.
a family vacation when I was like 4 years old. That's like my first really distinct memory is me falling down a giant flight of cement stairs as a kid.
That's just so random.
Yeah, and then like just being a child and blah blah blah. Nothing else really, but
That
like
explains a lot.
yeah, I know. God, bro, started off rocky.
So were you born in India? Were you
No, I was
born?
born here. It was like a vacation when I was like 3 years old or
Ah,
something. I
gotcha.
think it was the last time I went as well.
Really?
Yeah, so I have never been back since I was real young.
Okay. Is that a conscious decision?
My family has just never all up at once decided to go, you know? So
Oh.
it's just been like,
Yeah. And
yeah.
your parents, were they the first generation
Yeah, yeah. I
immigrants?
think my dad moved here when he was like 18 or
Oh,
19,
nice.
pretty young.
Cool.
Yeah, and then he was right away like a businessman himself, started a
Hmm.
business way back in the day.
Yeah. What
So
made him decide to move to Canada?
just opportunity,
Huh?
just opportunity. I started to have a bunch of family that moved over at the same time. Like, oh, it's great. So there was like a big influx of like his family in particular that all moved around the same era. And then they were all just like finding great opportunities, starting their own little businesses or hustling their way up the ranks. So yeah, that's sort of how we ended up.
Gotcha. So that was back in the what, 70s, 80s?
Yeah, 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
70s.
So was there like a huge influx of people from India moving to other countries at that time?
Yeah, I think so. You'll see a lot like London, California, BC, were like
Because those are
the
the popular
prime.
spots, right? Either the UK, the
Yeah,
US, or Canada, right?
right, for
Yeah.
sure.
And I would imagine during that time, out of the three, Canada was probably like the least, that like the last choice for
I
most
think
people.
so,
Yeah.
because like the Northwest is way less appealing than those other two if you don't know anything.
Right, right. Because
Yeah.
Canada was kind of like under the radar at that time, right? You know,
Yeah.
things have
No
changed
one
a lot
cared
now.
about
Yeah.
Canada yet.
Yeah. Yeah. They thought it's just part of the US, right?
Yeah. The US just annexed us. That's all.
Nice, nice. Yeah. So, what part of India was your family
Like
from?
Punjab region.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're both Punjabi, grew up there. Yeah, that was sort of it. Both of my parents, their parents were like either like military or law enforcement, way up in the ranks type of guys. They both sort of had similar upbringings. Um, yeah, and then the Canada side has been great. I have older siblings. I'm like the way afterthought accident. My next sibling is like 8 years older than me, and then 11. So I was 100% certified accident baby. I remember when I got told that on Christmas one year. I'm like, this is the worst Christmas. Why are you telling me I'm an accident? No,
Oh wow.
no.
How old were you at
I
that?
was like an adult, so
Oh,
like
already. Okay.
I
So
was already an
they
adult. So I
don't
was like,
care.
yeah, we were gonna like maybe not have you, and then we're like, ah, fine. And I'm like, oh, cool, cool, cool,
And that
cool.
also explains why they don't
Yeah.
give a fuck that you are not a lawyer or a doctor and you're doing this
Yeah.
for a living.
I mean, they definitely gave a fuck when I dropped out of law school because that was sort of like a big point of contention.
Oh, yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, that's another thing I want to ask you when we get to that part.
Yeah.
For sure. And then yeah. So what was growing up
I
in
grew up in
Canada like?
Abbotsford. So I grew up
Abbotsford.
in Abbotsford until like,
Were there a lot of Indians at that time out
no,
in our
so it
region?
was
No?
big racist when I was young. Like kindergarten through grade 5 was generally just a bunch of racial hatred a lot of the time at my school.
That is so weird, man. You know how? Why? Why? I mean, it's like, how do you even learn to hate somebody that you have never you don't have any idea about? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really fascinating because like I would remember being in like kindergarten or grade 1 and like grade 7s telling me to not look at like white girls. And I was like, whoa, that's weird. I'm a child. This doesn't feel that safe. But yeah, it was just like a time. Now, if you go to Abbotsford, it's like largely Indo-Canadian. There's a really strong community there and all these other things. But it was early 90s, you know?
Yeah. So
And then I moved to Burnaby. And then Burnaby was like the modern land by comparison, you know, way more multicultural, everything like that. And then I've lived in Burnaby pretty much ever since.
all right, but Abbotsford, it couldn't have been all bad, right? Were there any, what was like some fond memories of that place when you were growing up?
Just like, you know, because it's your early school year, school experience years, like all of that is always fun. Think of like, your favorite child is like having recess, playing, you know, living that life. So all of the usual childhood things were fun. Although, like, secretly in my childhood, there was a lot of things that I never did. Never learned how to ride a bike, learned how to swim. I did both those after I opened my gym, is when I learned how to do both of those things.
Wow.
Because I was like, oh, I should probably learn how to do this.
So I don't drown.
Yeah, so I don't drown, or so I can ride a bike with my nephew or something. Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah. So that's probably something that helped you to understand what it's like to learn something brand new as an adult. I would imagine, right?
I mean, I was pretty much always a really bad athlete, just universally, like not good. I remember when I started jiu-jitsu, I couldn't do like a single push-up, somersault, anything like that. It was like real pathetic. My first class, I tried to sneak out after the warm up and go home. And my buddy I came with was like, bro, we should probably do like at least a move. Right. And while it was sort of like the old school days where it'd be like a 30-minute circle warm up where everyone's counting out 10 reps of something, like I'm sure you remember that from way back, like, got to do a lot of conditioning so you can be like a tough fighter guy.
Dude, man,
And I was like, bro, we're leaving. Fuck this. This was awful.
Yeah. And back then, it depends on how the instructor felt that day. Sometimes those, boot camp style warm up can last for like the entire class if the instructor was in like a bad mood or something.
Oh yeah,
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, we're doing Tabatas for the first half hour of class.
You guys are fucking soft.
Yeah, yeah, it was ridiculous. It was a funny jiu-jitsu time back then because I felt like there were only like 3 teams. There's like Gracie Baja, Megaton, Carlson Gracie, and actually De La Riva. So maybe there were like 4 big teams. And I remember like local tournaments would still have sort of like a team versus team vibe. I remember once at like a Tiger Bomb or something, there was like a bench clearing like scuffle on the mat after like a white belt match between like a Baja and a Marcus Soares, like Carlson Gracie's too. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Tournaments back then used to be ridiculous because you would just show up, they would just write your weight, whatever you said, on a little slip of paper and then make the divisions up as they go. And I remember like one tournament, like one that like Marcus was running, and GB and like Carlson Gracie were at the peak of like not liking each other, I guess. And somehow I found myself in a division of all over 220 guys weighing like 180. And I somehow just kept having matches against Marcus's guys back to back to back. I'm like, bro, I lost like the last 2. There's no way I still have matches. But it was like just over and over and over again because I was like the only Baja guy at that tournament. I was like, oh, that was rough. But it was fun. It was good. But yeah, it was a hilarious time.
Oh, man.
Now smooth comp and stuff, man. Dude, easy. Yeah. Very, yeah, it's a whole
people still bitch and complain about it.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, hey, you guys have it easy. You don't even realize it. Shit.
Yeah, we had to show up at 8 a.m. and not fight till 8 p.m. all the time. It was this routine.
Yeah, and then the one time you decide to go later, then you missed your division. Yeah, now they're on time. Shit.
Yep.
Dude, that's awesome. So, early days of jiu-jitsu, I mean, those were the wild, wild west for sure. And when you first started jiu-jitsu, just because of your background of growing up being like one of the only Indian kid and some perceived racism. I'm gonna say perceived just to be fair to everybody, right? Do you feel like you had a chip on your shoulder when you started?
No. So honestly, loved UFC. I remember watching that like my whole life with my like brother and my dad. We'd go get it from Blockbuster, that whole thing. And then a friend and I were really big into the Ultimate Fighter, and we're like, yo, let's go do a bunch of trials at all these gyms because they all have free trials, and then let's fight each other after we do all the free trials because that'll be fun, and we're dumb 19-year-olds or whatever, But then I totally just did one class and signed up, and I like sold out my friend immediately. I'm like, sorry, bro, I'm just going to train all the time now. But that was like my main thing. And really when I started jiu-jitsu, I really just did it to compete. Like self-defense, 0 interest. Getting in shape, no interest at all. I really just wanted to do it to have something to compete in. And which is funny because I wasn't like a very particularly like athlete, sport competitive guy, but like when it comes to like independent things, very competitive. Like if we're gonna play board games, I'm probably gonna be an asshole and try and win. But it was just like that was the whole reason I did jiu-jitsu.
Okay, but growing up, have you felt that same way with any other sport, individual sports?
Nothing. I never played another individual sport. Maybe I played like everything I played. I would play like half of a season and then just quit. The only thing that I did like longer than half a season was I finished 1 full season of football, like maybe 9th grade or something like that, which was actually secretly one of like the more like transformative experience of my life because it took me like from a fat kid to a not fat kid, like from being sort of socially on the outside to being like right in the thick of like the social hierarchy suddenly. But besides that, I had never done any athletic activity for like more than a month or 2.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah. Because
big quitter over here, bro.
Well, look where you are now. I mean, it just goes to show you when you find something that's your true calling, right? Then you stick with it, right? So I think that's it's a big lesson for the parents out there too, right? Just because your kid can stick with something doesn't mean you just label them as a quitter, right? You should encourage them to keep on trying and find something that they are actually passionate about, that you don't have to force them to do something, right?
Totally.
Yeah. And speaking of which, another thing that came across my mind is that because you did say you were socially awkward, right? Probably more on the chubby side when you were growing up and stuff, right? So, and then again, being the Indo-Canadian, right? In a predominantly white neighborhood, right? So, do you feel like a lot of those kind of like dissolves when you step onto the jiu-jitsu mat? Because I'm thinking back, like, okay, I've trained in a lot of places, right? You meet like some assholes or people who are too rough, but they're never coming from like a place of hate,
Yep.
right? So why do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I've like never had a truly negative experience training or cross training. Honestly, even competing. Like I've never really had anything that I was like, wow, that guy's a dick, or they had it out for me, or anything like that. And I think a lot of it just has to be the nature of the activity, in that it's interesting because jiu-jitsu is like about me beating you up, but it's also about me just trying to get better all the time. And I think everyone's so aware that they suck. Like you just are, you suck because someone makes you feel like you suck in any training room, you know? And I find that is like a pretty powerful thing. But really, that could happen with like any activity, though. I'm sure if I was really into rock climbing and I was like the worst at the gym, I don't know, it would affect my personality and the way I interact with people just because I try and fail so often. I think that's a big part of it.
Nice. Yeah. So when did you know that you want to open a jiu-jitsu school?
Man, so as a white belt, I was already thinking of like how to do jujitsu for like my full-time thing post like university or whatever. But I really remember I had one black belt at the gym who told me that I couldn't make any money doing jujitsu and I should just like focus on the school stuff, which, yeah, maybe it had merit, maybe it didn't. But I've literally always held that as a giant chip on my shoulder for a lot of what I do. Because for me, sort of like if I had to think of my two big like jujitsu missions, it's one, try and get as many kids training, because I never did any extracurriculars as a kid at all. Zero until like high school maybe, and to try and help as many people make money off doing jiu-jitsu. I think those are like my probably two big drivers. So that's sort of like why Kaboom is the way it is, where like I have a team that coaches, like I have several team members that all work like 25, 30, 35 hours a week.
Yeah, it's
I
like
have
full-time
people on
gig.
salaries, I have like my job is to try and create employment, but also that helps me sort of reach other people. And then I do work with like schools, like consulting. And then again, that just dials right in because, hey, it's helping reach more kids and it's helping people make money doing jiu-jitsu, which are two sort of like passions that have come up over time. But it all sort of started with that black belt telling me that I couldn't make money back
So do
then.
you send that black belt a Christmas card every year?
I don't, but I should.
You should.
But
You
I
fucking should.
should. Yeah, definitely. It was interesting. A big game changing moment. I don't know why it bugged me so much. Probably because I was like, bro, I'm pretty smart. I probably can make money doing jiu-jitsu. Like.
Yeah, yeah, nice. Because I know Steve Kwan of BJJ Mental Models mentioned that you are even when you were a blue belt slash purple belt, that you were one of the best teachers that he has come across. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, I
He
started
said that on
teaching
his
really
podcast, man.
early.
He said that on his podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just saying. So when did you start to feel like, hey, I do have a knack for teaching?
So I like I had taught one random class as a white belt. I don't know why. Like the brown belt who was there was like, hey, teach the pendulum sweep from guard. You do that one a lot. I was like, okay, cool. I'll teach this one move I can sort of do. I did that, and then I started like not assisting with classes in like a major role, but like, hey, help supervise or whatever. And then by the time I just got on my blue belt, it was when I got my first paid teaching gig. And it wasn't at my school, it was at like another school. So like I had to sort of manage the politics of that. Um, but yeah, I had never actually thought of being a teacher until this person from that school approached me and was like, hey, Kabir, notice this, you're super passionate, you have really good jiu-jitsu, would you be interested in teaching? I was like, huh, never done it before at all. And I was still probably on the relatively like reserved side. Like now I'm pretty like outgoing. I feel like I'm a confident speaker, etc. At that point, I still hadn't done much speaking to large groups or anything outside of maybe some of the stuff I was doing in university, presentations, things like that. But then pretty much right away, like people liked my teaching, but I was also like very aggressive about teaching in the sense that I would like try and prepare as much as possible, but every single day I wouldn't let anyone leave without giving me feedback. And that was like my routine for the first probably year and a half. I tried to make sure every class I got feedback from 2 or 3 people. Yeah, and then I realized that like I wasn't totally awful because I could have higher belts, like black and brown belts in my class, and they enjoyed class. And that was sort of when I realized, like, oh, people don't really care about your rank as much as you might perceive. They care about, are you running an effective session? Yeah, and then I've been teaching pretty much almost full time. Like the only thing I did was teach and go to school, but I would teach like 12 or 14 classes a week since I was a blue belt, up to like my peak of teaching like 40 classes a week when I opened my gym. So I've racked up a lot of mat hours in that sense.
Gotcha. Yeah. So who are some of the most important people who gave you the confidence and the praise to really boost your confidence to step out of your comfort zone and become the teacher that you are?
First person, Milo from Apex, Milo Hilario. He was the guy who asked me to teach. Like, bro, I've never even considered this. I guess I'll do that. So yeah, I always think of him as like him and Marcy, his wife, as super like impactful people because they were the first people to actually let me teach. And like their school was brand new; they had 0 students, and I was one of their first instructors. Myself and another black belt were running their program. So that was like a really big vote of confidence, and I got a lot of experience there. Besides that, it's like every coach that I've had has always given me the opportunity, and they've always entrusted me like to do well, I guess. But yeah, Milo stands out because he was like the first one. I would have never really thought of coaching yet, as like a option. I thought it would have had to be much later. But then to be doing it as a blue belt, I realized right away I really enjoyed all that came with it.
Nice. Yeah. So, and I imagine at that time your teaching style is probably more like traditional, right? With explicit instructions and stuff like that. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I mean, it was the way, right? That all practice
It
was.
was the way of BJJ.
Yeah, it was the way of BJJ in the mid 2000s. Yeah, but there were still things like a lot of my favorite coaches would do little specific training, or they wouldn't just have us do rote reps. They do like flow drills or whatever. So like I got exposure to a lot of people who used a lot of different like training methodologies because there were some guys that I trained with that were like judo black belts. So like judo had some like infrastructure to the way they coach and train because it's an actual sport, right? Not that jiu-jitsu is not an actual sport, but in that sense, it had legit people cared about studying how to be good coaches. So I would see some of the things they would do, which was always interesting too. But yeah, I was totally like, I would say up until probably like the end of 2021, I was still mostly like just straight warm up, teach something, drill the things, then sparring. And then I started to play with a lot more like guided sparring where like, hey, you have a series of actions you can do, or like what I usually call like free shot sparring where I get to do my first off balance or my first entry and then it's live, or my first pass attempt, like my first movement for the pass and it's live. So I'd already started to play with some more little like games and stuff, and we're already using a lot of that in my kids class. But yeah, up until then I was pretty traditional, like, hey, let me teach you
Yeah.
this De La Hiva series for a month straight and stuff like that.
Yeah, because I know when you teach in that manner, like the more traditional style, you instructors tend to pride themselves in being able to go over the details that matters, right? So, but in the eco or the more guided, constraint-led approach, then you are focusing the intention on the stuff that the objectives that matters, right? So, how do you kind of reconcile the difference?
Well, so interesting. The real difference is like, I just always like to think is if you think of like that random blue belt that you're like, yo, that guy's pretty good for a year. That guy just has a lot of mat time, right? And that's usually always true. Like anyone who you think is good, they probably just have more mat time than you. Is like just a truth that exists, right? So when it came to like switching to sort of prioritize that, it became how could I teach this technique but make it in this. So like my first sort of regression would be like end stage, like, hey, we're going to work on knee cut passing today. We're going to start all the way here. And I would still explain everything we're doing. Just finish this last part of this pass. Boom. Now you're one stage back. These are all the things that are important. Just finish this. But it was like, it was very easy to just realize that, like, oh, you can make all of these, like, core exchanges that happen in jiu-jitsu into some sort of game or constraint-based sort of activity. And I always thought it was, I observed right away that it was way more effective for my students just on their value of time, because more and more as you like appreciate the time, like, some of these people only have 2 hours. And if they only come twice a week and they only touch a resisting body for 10 to 15 minutes a session, that's 30 minutes of like jujitsu a week. Now I'm sort of fortunate that guys are doing like 40 to 45 minutes of live per session. So if they come twice, they're doing 90 minutes of jiu-jitsu. Like at 3x their training if they come what I consider like the minimum amount, you know? So converting was really easy for me when I could just like see the objective benefits, and then it was just on me to learn like how to change the way I use language or explain things as a result of that.
Okay, gotcha. So it sounds like you don't become less of a coach. You actually have to become more of a coach, right? Because it sounds like what you're describing is when you are teaching by giving out like details and stuff, you actually don't have to think about what the students want or if they can absorb it or not. You're basically just spouting out information, right? Whether they can receive it or not, right? But when you're coaching the way you are doing right now, you actually have to say, hey, did my coaching language actually work? Do they actually understand where they need to be paying attention to? Are they actually accomplishing the objectives? And if not, how can I rephrase it in a way that makes sense to them, right? So would you say that it actually gives you even higher levels of understanding in
Yeah.
terms of coaching?
I would actually say now my jiu-jitsu like understanding is probably the best it's been, in the sense that like the prep for practice initially for me when I started switching over was like pretty long, because I'd be like for an hour class, I would probably spend 1 to 3 hours with all my prep. Probably excessive, but it's like what I want to do because I wanted to watch that sort of position happen a couple times. I wanted to see some people's different like viewpoints on what happens, so I could start identifying like, what's the precursor? Like, what's the first thing that always has to happen? You know, and then how can I build a game or a practice activity that sort of lends people to find that or to understand why that's so important, you know? So I found I had to do a lot more like prep work, but it led to me, I think, having like a much better understanding of jiu-jitsu now. Just because like it's very easy to tell people to do specific things. Like most instructors just YouTube something at lunch, teach it at 6 p.m., boom, flawless victory. You didn't have to understand anything. You just have to know what the details are. Whereas like now I find after understanding like, what's actually causing that effect in that other person? What allows this to be successful? What has to happen first? What can't happen? You know, and like just having to reflect on jiu-jitsu with that lens, I think it really forces you to understand more. And that's why sometimes you might hear like other people say like people can have a challenge doing this and they just want people to give them like a giant list of games to play. But that's not really the process, because you have to still be able to guide and explain all the language around it. And if you don't understand why this exchange is important or why this one task is the whole focus of this game, still not going to be effective. It's the same thing as just YouTubing a move and showing it.
Right.
Right? So I think like, yeah, to go back, definitely made me improve my coaching, but I've been thinking like it really just improved my jiu-jitsu. Like the way I see jiu-jitsu has been a lot better, because really one thing I think is our goal should be to like reduce everything to a simple, like, you know, what are the first principles? What are the most basic things to understand? And that was already a little bit of my mission when I was like approaching our teaching and our training here at Kaboom. And then that sort of helped me realize, oh, this will really like force me to be reductionist in that way.
Nice. Yeah, dude, that's a way better way to put it than I can ever do, you know. So I guess the follow-up question would be, then what gave you the fucking confidence to just make the switch like that? Because the reason why I'm saying is, it's not like you had nothing to lose, right? I can understand if you're like a struggling school or whatever. You're like, man, what do I have to lose? I'll switch to this. Maybe my business,
Yeah.
I'll attract new people, right? You already have like, you know, a very successful business with loyal students who are not complaining about the way you are teaching. So by switching to this your eco approach, you had everything to lose, right? So did you lose any students? Did you have any pushbacks? And what was, if so, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, so interesting. For me, I had no pushback at all, truthfully. Um, well, there was some, but I'll talk about it later. But as far as initial pushback, like none. Because if you think of most of your students, their favorite thing is sparring.
You
Like,
get to spar the entire class. Yay!
yeah, exactly. You just spar the entire class. So there's no pushback. And it was really interesting in the sense that like, yes, we just flicked the switch, but for me it was sort of easy for me to just convert wholesale because at that point my youth program was already pretty much 80% small-sided games, constraints-based stuff. We were already mostly teaching through like external cues versus like internal stuff. So I had done it a lot, and I'm like, man, these kids sure do love training all the time, you know. Of course, my adults did too, but I was already comfortable enough to know that learning is learning and having fun is literally having fun, you know. But yeah, we had no pushback at all. And to make the switch wasn't hard because for me, it wasn't about preserving what I have so much as it was on delivering what I promised, which for me was, hey, you came here to learn jujitsu. I should be trying to be the most effective coach I can at all times, right? Which means reading books about coaching, trying stuff in class, you know, making like reflecting on how that went. So for me, I'm like, oh, I have to do this because I can see the merits of it. And for me, when I actually first implemented it, I didn't want to just like try it in a class and see how people enjoyed it. So I sort of committed to an initial like 4-week block. I took over all the adult classes at my school for that period, and I just taught as many sessions as I could in a row because I also wanted my coaches to be in the class so they can
You
experience
get their
it.
buy-in and stuff too.
Yeah, and it was just way easier because like whether you're like a black belt or a white belt, you really want to play the game. As a white belt, you might think that you don't want to and you need to know a bunch of stuff. When you realize like, oh, I just have to try and do that. Like I see a lot of white belts who are like relieved that I'm like, oh, you don't have to know what you have to do. You just have to know what you're trying to accomplish. Only thing you can't do is poke them in the eye and do this, you know, like.
Unless I tell you so.
Yeah, exactly. So I had no pushback. The only like ever frictiony thing I would have is sort of just like a universal curriculum challenge. It's like, I wish we could revisit that thing again. But that's just sort of a normal thing, right? Getting your frequency and repetition in over a large time scale. It was really interesting though because I found people felt like they were always, maybe not always progressing, but not necessarily like stagnant because they were forced to engage in parts of jiu-jitsu that they might other not really prioritize or pay attention to when they're there. So I like routinely have people who feel like they don't have plateaus the same way they do.
Gotcha. Wow. So overall, no pushbacks and everything. So because Matt Kwan, right, another friend of ours who has
Yeah.
the Essential Jiu-Jitsu podcast, you know, go listen, give that podcast a listen. It's great. Right. If you want bullshit, listen to this one. You want good jiu-jitsu information, listen to that one.
Right? That's hilarious.
Because in his podcast, he said that he switched over to completely eco for 3 months as well, right? And he did say he got pushbacks from older practitioners who feels like every session becomes, they feel like they're not in here to cooperate, to become better together. It almost become like a competition every single class. And they also feel like they're not having as much fun because to like older people, one of the way they feel like they have a sense of fulfillment is collecting techniques, right? Like, oh, I'm learning this technique. Oh, this technique is so cool, and now I'm collecting this technique, right? And now all that stuff is out the window. So, was he doing it wrong?
I can't say that, but I will say this. The core thing you have to understand is you had one product, you attracted one audience to that product, and then you changed the product altogether. You know, it's just like if a restaurant suddenly quit serving breakfast, you know, now they only do takeout or something weird. You're gonna have people like, oh, I like this, but it's different and it's not as, you know, it's not the same experience. So that's like inherently the first thing is you change the product, right? You change the type of service you're offering, because one was sort of about learning things and trying things and, you know, that side, whereas the other was about getting better. And they're very different because one is a class and one is a practice, right? If you want to think of it in that sense. And it's just the inherent nature of it. Now, are there things that maybe you could do to mitigate some of those perceived things? For sure. One is, of course, the language and the culture you try and establish around training. Like, how do you frame everything? Because for me, I frame everything as a game with very clear goals. You know, and I never have to tell people to like work with your partner. Like some people smash each other and that's fine. My task then, so one is like how you frame it, culture, language around everything. I think another thing that becomes more important is intervening and partnering. Like, because the person who's fun to just drill with is probably not the same person who's fun for you to spar with. Whether it's because, hey, you drill with your big friend who's not a size match, or you drill with someone who there's a skill gap or intensity gap or whatever, right? So I think partnering becomes really important. And if you like look at stuff, it's a key thing because you have to have the right like challenge point, right? Like, but it's also interesting though because sometimes I've had black belts go with white belts and everyone's having a great time. So it could. I can't speak to why he had some challenges, but I think a lot of time it's just like how you present it. Because I never presented it as like, ta-da, we're going to do a whole new thing. I just quietly made class that way. Yeah, people getting like worn out, I did find, but I found that was like an earlier thing where I would spend like an entire session on all the skills related to like securing front head attacks. And everyone's like, well, my neck is on sideways, you know, or things like that I did encounter, but that was like a pretty easy course adjustment. But I think the core thing is like Matt is a very technical guy when it comes to details and transitions and just knowledge around jiu-jitsu. He has a ton of it. Maybe his audience, his students, that was probably maybe one of their prime drivers is they wanted to know where to grip, why to grip, you know, and then you switch it. And that can be very natural. And then, you know, it just is what it is. Because I've heard some people have a similar thing, but it's usually because of what they were initially sort of like selling and servicing. For me, I had already been having class start going like half and half for like live games or drills to practice the skills, you know? So it wasn't like I went from like kata to full combat. You know, I was already in the middle of it, which might have helped for me.
Gotcha. Yeah, Matt, talk to Kabir. Come back to the dark side. Let's go. Yeah. So has the thought of providing different classes ever crossed your mind? Like, oh, maybe I have a, you know, a traditional one and the eco one, and just to see which one does better or whatever.
No, honestly, because for me, when I like the reason for me to do that would be to try and like drive engagement of my students and things like that. But I think the thing that makes people like jiu-jitsu is when they realize they're getting better, right? And if I can create the environment that helps you improve the most consistently, you know, I think that is all I need to be doing. Does it probably take more active coaching for me throughout a session, like when you're sparring and I'm going to try and give you some feedback of, you know, what the result you're trying to look for or whatever, for sure. But, you know, we have had people, well, you know, I've thought of like, hey, would there be a place for that? But even here, we're just like, hey, we should have a foundations class. But I'm like, I think the foundations class would still all be live. Like I don't think there's a reason to separate it, because then it all just goes out the window anyways. It's like when people never spar because they're in a program. It's like, hey, there's no sparring until your second stripe, and now you can do this level of sparring. And then when you're here, you can now do full sparring. I feel like that's just such a long delay to actually touch and play, you know? So for us, yeah, we never really have flirted with it. One thing that actually now I am flirting with is, can I put this alongside a reverse classroom type setup?
Okay.
Just because, like, if you come into practice, that's an hour to 2 hours every day. Not all of your jiu-jitsu growth happens in that hour to 2 hours.
Right.
A lot of it is going to happen in the other 22, 23 hours, right?
Hey,
What
people
you
got a
choose
life
to,
too, man.
yeah, exactly. You know, like what
Yeah,
you
they're
look
not
at
gonna be thinking about
Instagram
jiu-jitsu
or
the whole
whatever. Yeah, exactly. So it's like there's a literal time constraint, so I have to really maximize time. If there was a trade-off I would do, it would be something outside, because practice is for practicing. It's not for learning, I think.
Right,
You know,
right.
or teaching. It's about creating good practice activities that force you to engage with the right parts of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. What if I told you there's an ad for you?
So just tell me more.
I'm
Yeah.
kidding. So the next thing is just talking to your wife, Darcy, before the interview. I get the sense that she is not 100% sold on the eco approach.
It's totally wrong, bro. No. For her, I think her primary thing is she does think that, hey, there's a time where it is helpful to know the discrete, you know, this function or this step or whatever. But the real counter is, hey, you could really just still game that too, right? But this is why I think that there is merit in watching stuff outside of class. And I encourage that. And I think like most people who run this type of practice encourage that, because that's like most of human learning is through watching people and like, I'm going to try that, you know? It's not uncommon. It's not going to like taint your practice, because the practice is for practicing. Whatever you think you want to focus on and try, that's what practice is. So, you know, I can hear her concern, but I think it's like, it's a very easy thing to address, you know?
Are you getting better?
Yeah.
Right. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, right? If she is actually getting better, because you've been doing this approach for over a year now, right? So she must know whether.
Oh yeah, everyone's getting better.
Yeah. So there you go.
You know what's funny? I always find when people have concerns about this method, it's not about whether it'll be good for their own development, but it's for fictitious white belt who can't learn anything.
Fictitious white belts, yeah.
You know, but they all learn stuff because they
don't
just
even exist, right? Everybody learns the same way, right?
Yeah, it's funny because like so it was really interesting when I first started this. I had like a blue belt, and his brother was going to start for the first time and no jiu-jitsu background or whatever, and he's like what I call like student zero, because it was the first brand new person who had never done any jiu-jitsu, and when he started, it was right when I had started jiu-jitsu.
Nice.
And the blue belt had concerns like, oh, I don't know if he's going to be able to like pick it up and like learn this or that, and then all of his concerns, seeing them through his brother, he's like, oh, I was totally wrong.
Oh,
It didn't even apply at all. Like,
tell me more.
Sure, he was like awkward and trying to figure his stuff out, but now he like gets it much sooner than he did. He's like, damn, like I totally thought he'd need more hand holding to figure out how to get into single leg X and keep it and off balance people or whatever. But like, turns out he didn't. He just had to be set up somewhere like proximate to something that would make that happen. So you could see like that little step that he had to make or whatever. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, routinely, I'm always like, man, my white belts are way better than I was as a white belt, because they can play all of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, but that was only one person. He's the exception, right?
Right? Yeah, but no, it's so fascinating because I see it with like everyone. Like, I'll have guys who are like 50 who come in and they train, and it's totally fine because like here's the physical thing. Like, no one said you had to go balls to the wall the whole time, and you can't. You really literally can't. Maybe for a session, and then you start learning like how to pace yourself. But also for me, like there's like at the same time, I'm observing these things with my students. You know, I'm not just like coaching blind, not taking in their experience. I'm seeing what's happening. So it's like now we do things where like I'll rotate my activities to keep their energy levels in mind. So I'll play a guard scenario, and then I'll do something that's more static, more of a pin or like a submission isolation. And then I'll go back out to something sort of in the middle where there's a higher level of engagement. Maybe not as much as like a guard or standing scenario, but like a front headlock. So now it's like I have to be monitoring their energy and like planning. But like, so what you would do if you're planning like a workout for someone, you put your most intense shit sort of at the beginning, right? And then eventually you're doing like lighter accessory lifts when you know their energy is dropped off. I should be considering that in my programming. So like, yeah, it's been really interesting because now I've had so many like fresh white belts who have never done jiu-jitsu. I'm like, you've trained before. I was like, no, I totally haven't. I'm like, oh shit, no way. Because they sort of just like know what they should be trying to do. Because I always find that's like the biggest thing is like people just don't know what are the paths we should be trying to get.
Right.
Or now it's like, hey, I should be trying to get under you. I should be trying to get behind you. I should be trying to get connected to your upper body. Makes sense, and then they can just play towards those goals.
Yeah. Wow. So it actually does sound like this style of teaching and coaching requires so much more prep work, requires so much more of a having an open mind and constantly trying to see what works and what doesn't work. That's so much work. Maybe that's why most schools don't want to switch to doing it.
It's the same work you would take to have a good business, though.
Yeah.
Right? Like, for me, like, so dropping out of law school was sick, but in law school, everything is sort of independent study. Like, your teachers don't care if you learn the thing. Everything is on a bell curve. You get one test. It's ultra competitive, you versus everyone else. So you have to learn to be an engaged learner on your own. Study, seek out the sources outside of the recommended sources. Because I'm going to get all the tutorial books and all these things and this practice test from 3 years prior or whatever, You have to learn to be resourceful and test stuff. And that was one of the things that I find really helped me with, of course, my business. Because, hey, how do I market? No idea, but I know I can find that out and study it and try it. And like, it's sort of like an inherent element that you need to. And for coaching, it's very easy to just do what you've done, which is why sometimes people can have like challenges with some of like for most people that I speak to about like kids stuff, when they have challenges with their kids program, it's because they aren't trying, like they aren't, not to sound shitty, but they're not really trying to get any better at coaching. They're just coaching like they coach for adults, which is very easy because you're fully functioning, you're engaged because you came here of your own volition. You're the lowest hanging fruit for me to teach, right? I don't have to manage your behavior. I don't have to do anything. It's very easy for me to coach you. I don't need to be pushed to grow. Whereas like if you want to be really good at like coaching kids or coaching on a high level, you have to study. It's funny, like I was at the Lovato Association meeting and I did like a little presentation to all the school owners about this. And I was like, yo, who here has gotten a BJJ Fanatics thing in the last 3 years? And everyone's like, of course, obviously. And like, who here has read a book on coaching in the last 3 years?
That's a couple people.
It was like very few. Who here writes out their lesson plan for what they're going to teach? Just a couple of hands. It was like, those are core activities for your job as a coach, right? And I think sometimes that can be a challenge as people are not owning that role to its full extent, because being a coach is research and development, it's practice plan, it's evaluating your practice, it's collecting feedback, it's watching footage of your practice. If you want to be really good, because like an NFL coach watches all that shit, they do all that stuff, they think of all the participants who are going to be in that session, where they're at, and what is going to be like coaching is a very lucrative, high-paying career in many things because there's a lot that goes into it. But you can also get by it very simply because if you go to any like soccer field in the world, there's some 20-year-old guy who just
football guy.
who played soccer and is now the coach, but just is doing some stuff that they did when they were a kid. I think it requires you to be like very engaged in the process if you want to like, I don't know, not be good, but I think it's natural. If you like jiu-jitsu, you probably were chasing the thrill of leveling up and getting better. I encourage a lot of people to like take that same ownership over your coaching practice too.
Nice. Yeah, that's good advice. I know most people it's just gonna go one ear and out the other. But it sounds like law school wasn't a complete waste of your time and money.
Oh,
right?
super good.
Yeah.
Super useful. Okay, learning to be high stakes, same exact environment as business. You know, it's me competing against everyone else in the market. Law school is me competing against everyone else in first year, right? Because there can only be one person who's the top percentile of the class, you
Right.
know? So it's like naturally, but also there's a lot of other like fun side things. Like, hey, law school was when I started learning about like, you should try and attend random conferences and panels to pick up like side knowledge. Or like, dude, I in law school there was like etiquette clinics where like how to meet and network people, which sounds really like robotic.
Don't be a creep.
But it's like the littlest dumb stuff like, hey, if you're going into a room, hold whatever you're holding in your left hand so you can greet people with your right hand. And I'm like, that seems really robotic, but man, it saves you the one awkward interaction all the time. It just increases your first impression. And it's like really dumb, but I learned like so many like soft skills
Right.
through that process. But the biggest thing I always take away is like I learned just max accountability and ownership of whether or not I do well or fail.
Right, right. Yeah. So did you go to law school to appease your parents, or did you actually wanted to be a lawyer?
I wanted to. It was a big thing. Like I worked really hard to try and get in. I ended up going to like University of Oregon for law school, and it was something I was really passionate about. But it was funny though because even my undergrad, I would like intern at local law firms. Like I did my co-op at a law firm, things like that. And then when I was actually working at law firms in my 1L year, like for that summer as like a paid sort of position, or even like talking to my teachers and professors at school, pretty much every one of them was like, bro, why are you doing law? All you've talked about is this jiu-jitsu stuff, right? And then I had a lot of like partners who's like, you should probably not do this. Go try the jiu-jitsu thing. You can probably make it work. And if it doesn't, just come back here. And then like I heard that from a lot of people, but I thought they were just being like rah rah, chase your dreams. But at the one law firm that I was working, it was like a corporate law firm. You know, I was like the only first year student sort of working there that summer. But one of the partners was a Hall of Fame wrestler in Oregon for college. And he was like, him I took very serious because obviously he has a deep passion for grappling.
Right.
And he's obviously a very smart guy to be one of the named partners of this firm. And then he told me, like, no, you should just drop out and go try that right now. Because he's like, you're like, I think I was 24 at the time. He's like, you should drop out, learn a bunch for a year, and then just open your school. And then I was like, okay, I can do that. And that's literally sort of exactly what I did.
Nice. So do you have any regrets now? You could have been a lawyer. You could be fat as fuck right now and taking high blood pressure pills. And all
Dude,
that.
okay, that was the worst thing though. The one thing that really turned me off, the work itself, I very much enjoyed it. And I was like, I did well in that environment, doing all the tasks and sort of the stuff. But the thing that I hated was the culture of law school as well as working in law offices. Dude, it's party time as soon as whatever needs to be done is done. Like law school was pretty much grind your eyeballs off Sunday afternoon to Thursday afternoon and then just be on a bender from Thursday through Saturday night. Like it was routine. Like Thursday night was like the pub night or whatever, and it was just a wild party the whole time, you know? At the law firm, 6 p.m. hits or whatever the last thing, everyone has bottles in their desk. I'm like, man, this whole culture is around like grinding your face off and then getting wasted. I'm like, I don't know. That also seemed like a turnoff to me.
Wow.
And most of them were unhappy in their job.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's funny how that is, eh? You know, you spend so much time, sacrifice your time and health and money and everything to chase something that you think you want, and then you end up not being happy. You know, what the fuck, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a big eye opener for me. I was, I don't think it's smooth.
So I guess the answer is no regrets, eh? That you.
Yeah, no regrets. I am very thankful I went though for that 1 year. I think every thought and viewpoint and things I have and the success I have would be way different if I didn't go to law school. Because actually, before I went to law school, I was considering being like one of my friends, like number 2 guy at his school that he was just going to open. I was like, I can either hop in with my buddy or go to law school. And I was like, I'll go to law school because that is here right now. I have a scholarship. Let's chase that. Let's see what that's like, if I enjoy it, etc.
And I don't want to be number two to nobody.
Hey, I'm down to be number 2, man. If we can make the mission happen, I'm on board.
Right, man. Yeah. So yes, because I did mean to ask you this in the very beginning when we were talking about the whole dropping out of law school thing, right? So as a because your parents were first generation, so they're still probably deeply rooted in the entire Asian parents' way of thinking, right? So how did you convince them to support you in dropping out of law school and pursuing something I would imagine they think is highly risky?
Yeah, 100%. So first is I was like, of my two other siblings, I was the only one who like did post secondary. So I got my bachelor's. So I sort of already like checked one box in their eyes. You know what I mean? Then I got in, and that was good. And of course, it's viewed as like risky, but I just had to start presenting math. So I was like, hey, here is what my current coach is able to do in their school. And this, like, this is how many clients they have. This is what it looks like. Like, I think I could do that.
That was Apex, right? Was it Apex
So
at that time? No.
it was Gracie Barra
Gracie
Vancouver.
Barra,
So
like,
Tim
yeah.
Shears.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was where I did all my training up until I got my brown belt.
Right. It's a successful business, right? So
Yeah, and he was crushing it, and like that location in his
that
business,
helped.
even though it transferred over, continued to crush it. So that was a really strong example. And then I was like, man, obviously I'm smart. Like, it was sort of like a shady thing, but I'm gonna commit to making this work. Like learning what I need to do and everything sort of around that. But yeah, everyone was pissed. Like, everyone was pretty big mad about it. But like in the year, because I came back at a year off. Pardon?
Good thing you can easily choke all of them out.
Yeah. But it was really interesting because I took a year off when I came back, and I just did jiu-jitsu and attended business seminars. That's all I did for the 1 year after I came back from law school. And then the following year, I opened my school. So I was like, I think partly because they were like sort of choked. I was like, I'm definitely not going to fuck it up. Right. I wanted to make sure I like crushed it. So yeah, it was hard for sure. But I was like, if it fails, I can just go back. Because like in school, it's not like I was like a fringe student. I was already at the top of my class. I'm like, I can just go back. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Right. And any of those people who told you to go chase your dreams, they'll welcome you back with open
Oh,
arms,
for
right?
sure. Yeah, exactly. So I wasn't like concerned. It's not like the door is closed forever. I'm just gonna look over here for a bit and see if I can make this happen.
Yeah. But it sounds like the biggest difference is that once you made the decision, it wasn't like a emotional decision or a decision out of desperation, right? It was a decision that you made consciously that, hey, you know what? I know I want to do this, and I'm going to do it right. So from what you're saying is, I like a lot of people, they would jump right into, okay, I want to do jiu-jitsu, I want to open a school. Then they would just go in without crunching the numbers, without having any type of business plan, right? And that's why they struggle so much, right? But then you spend the time, like before I open, I'm going to go to these business conferences. I'm going to, have a plan. I need to know exactly what I need to do to be successful, right? Is that
Yeah, I mean, that was my thing. It's like, I'm not going to walk into it blind, right? And like, because one time, like, somebody told me, it's like, hey, Kabir, if you open a school, just doing jiu-jitsu won't make you any money. You're going to have to learn all these other skills, lead gen, marketing, sales, at least initially. So I was very aware of that. It's funny, though. I didn't have a business plan at all. I had $10,000 that I had earned from that summer of law school where I worked. And then because I had that $10,000, it gave me a $10,000 limit on my credit card.
Nice.
And I had no business plan. I was just like, I'm just going to try and break even as fast as possible.
How long did that took?
So I got there, but then instantly I was always trying to hire people. Like, because I knew to like actually grow, I would need to. So it's interesting because like my first couple years, I tried to pay myself as little as possible so I could grow a team around me. And it wasn't until probably like 2016 or so where I was like, okay, now I'm going to start actually giving myself a salary, growing more and more and more. But yeah, in the beginning, it was like a grind. I definitely almost closed Kaboom at least 2 different times. Like, yo, I've been losing $3,000 every month. This is sort of stressful. But then I was like, nah, I can't do that. I'll just do whatever hard things need to be done. Yeah, because I had a bunch of crazy Kaboom shit that made me nearly reconsider this. Probably like 3 different occasions for sure.
Yeah. So what do you feel like was the biggest mistake that you made throughout?
The biggest mistake is sort of the universal mistake that I see most people make is they start a thing, they stop a thing, they start a new thing. Whether it's a way of structuring their class or running their marketing or their sales or da 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 da. I just wouldn't let myself get to that tipping point where I get like continuous momentum, where I did a thing long enough to be good at it. You know, I do a thing long enough to have mixed results and move on, but never long enough to actually just let that snowball effect start happening, right? Because now, like, one of like my core pieces of advice I gave everyone is like, hey, if you decide you're going to do this thing in your business, commit to doing it for 90 days, 6 months, a year, so you can actually get good at it. Because otherwise, you don't even know if that thing is good idea, bad idea, or not. You just suck at it. It doesn't matter. And then, like, for jiu-jitsu school owners, it usually helps to make sense. I'm like, hey, when it came to developing your jiu-jitsu, you didn't, like, try half guard for 3 weeks, fuck it, spider guard, fuck it, close. Like, everyone who's really good at jiu-jitsu, they're like, hey, I'm going to play half guard. And they played half guard for a couple months in a row to get good at half guard. And then they were actually finally able to have a baseline to actually build something off of, you know? That's probably the biggest mistake that I've made was constantly changing stuff when I didn't see the result rather than giving myself to create the result I want through actually building my skill related to that.
Gotcha. So what was the turning point then?
For me, it's always been like a mentor game, getting around the right people. Because a lot of the things that I think will hold you back just tend to be like your beliefs about like how you have to run it or what you have to do or, you know, so being around the right people and then just learning how to like prioritize my attention, let's say, or like what's really important. Because, like, I'll tell you, the least money I made was when I was teaching the most amount of classes. You know, when I was teaching 35 classes, I had no bandwidth to do anything meaningful to grow my business. Like, but I was like, oh, but I'm doing these privates and those privates are making me money. And I'm teaching these classes and those are making me money. But I wasn't doing anything else that actually creates like leverage in my business or repeat revenue or, you know, something strong, you know? So just like having some mentors around me that really made me realize that was super powerful.
Gotcha. Yeah. So how do you go about finding mentors then?
The internet, you and Google are just going to be best friends, you know? Because really, like, if you just start seeing who's successful, if you start like checking their references, like, hey, like now it's so easy. Like, if I hear one smart person, I'm going to listen to all the podcasts they do. And then on all their podcasts, they probably mention some people. Next person I'm researching, all the people that person mentioned. And then those people are saying some stuff. Who did they mention? You know, and eventually I'll follow the tree and you get to like, you know, the roots. But along the way, you start finding people who are sharing information or providing coaching or whatever. So that was like literally all I did. I'm like, huh, this guy has a really successful kickboxing franchise. Wonder what they're up to. Lo and behold, they had coaching, you know? Just that. Honestly, another thing from like law school, just because like you do classes in law school that are just research and writing. How to Google, how to use negative keywords, how to have really, you know, like, so just like being able to search and find out. Now it's way easier though, because now those guys are targeting gym owners with great Instagram ads. They will get you 90 students in 90 days and do ABC, you know. It's different now, but
For sure. Yeah. Then how do you know if those people are legit or not? I mean, what are some of the processes that that you can go through to vet them?
So for me, one thing is, of course, social proof, just like we do for everything. I'm going to vet them to see how far their network of happy clients goes and who here am I a step or two removed. Usually I know at least one person or have a connection with one. So that's route one of vetting. Do I know a person who's in here doing this, can speak to it? Yes or no. Route two is I really like to see like how professional are they in their business as a consultant. What I mean by that is like, hey, are they a one-man show consultant group, coaching group? Because I don't want to be a one-man show here. And if they can't build a team to help deliver that thing, can they help me do this? So I try and look for parallels. Like, even if they don't run a school, because sometimes people are like too quick to discredit someone who doesn't currently run a school. While that is important, I don't think it's the be all end all, right? People can have a number of reasons for exiting running their school, right? But I want to see like, hey, are the practices they say, are they existing in what they do? Like if they're telling me to content market all the time, but they aren't, is that, like I'm going to evaluate that. I am a really big fan of having mentors who are actively involved in the space. Doesn't mean that hopefully they're not like the full-time coach or whatever, but hey, they have a school that's successful or they're a partner in a school or just something like that. But the thing is like I've worked with so many different groups. And again, I think all of them would have led me to have great success if I were to stick with it. I think truthfully, the most important thing is you have to like vibe with the person, values, view-wise, how they think business should be done. Because there are going to be people who have killer information. It works. You'll make it rain. You'll be Scrooge McDuck in no time. But if it doesn't like match your vision or your values, you're going to half-ass it all the way. Or you're going to like self-sabotage and let that stuff fail. Because like, just think like in jiu-jitsu, there's people who will sell you a training package for $600 before you even go on the mat. And that works and that shit is good and it's not a scam. It's just part of a bigger system that matches their values of how they want to build things. There's other people who do a 30-day free trial, very low pressure, but they convert and it just matches with them, right? Again, I think it's just like do it long enough to fix it, make it work, But yeah, when it comes to vetting people, man, social proof, results, and the way they carry out their current business are what's most important to me.
Gotcha. Are you currently mentoring anybody?
Yeah, I have 5 schools, I think, that I mentor, like New Mexico, Texas, Oregon, Virginia, Ontario. I have like a handful. I haven't fully figured out how I want to dive into that.
So
But
it's not an official business or anything like that right now, eh? Just kind of helping them on a more of a personal level, you say?
yeah, like it's primarily like one-to-one coaching with some like online resources. Like, hey, I have curriculum for you. I have videos of my classes. I have some instructor training resources, and I'll hop on the phone with you a couple times a month whenever you need it. But like, obviously, that's not going to be my end goal with making that like way more accessible, but something I've definitely started to do a little bit more of, which is fun because for me, like, again, going back to like my 2 missions of like either helping a lot of like kids and adults do jiu-jitsu and get good, or helping a bunch of school or people who want to make jiu-jitsu their full-time thing have success doing that. So it's like super gratifying for me to be able to do that.
Nice.
Because I've helped a couple people like quit their jobs. One of my friends, he and his wife quit their jobs as school teachers to make their school full-time. I just had a school I'm working with where one of the owners quit their full-time job to hop all the way into the school, which is like the best, I always feel like, oh, you really took a big gamble on my advice, but I know it'll work,
Awesome, man. Yeah, so guys, blow up his DMs if you
Yeah, hit me up. I'm happy to help.
for sure. So here's a question for you then. What are you struggling with the most right now?
As a business owner, jiu-jitsu,
Whatever.
everything, I would say the biggest struggle, it's not even a struggle. It's just you're always in the same process of find a bottleneck, break the bottleneck, and then a new one appears when you start doing good, Just being in that process and being understanding of like the seasons of everything, the seasons of your skill development, the seasons of how your program develops, of how your business develops. There's going to be killer seasons, whack ones, everything in between, but they're all just part of this like cycle. For me, I think one of the biggest challenges can just be like, let me quickly zoom back out. Great, everything is still upward on the whole. Everything is still moving in the way I want. Boom, now I can go back in. I mean, that is usually the biggest challenge. And then, of course, when it comes to like, what is that individual bottleneck? Hey, in my school, is it growing a better, more empowered team where they can move the needle more on their own? Or is it in my curriculum? How can I make sure that I hit things with enough frequency, depth, and variation so that they can really, like it's always going to be something, but it's just, I think the biggest challenge is making sure that you don't get stuck too zoomed in and you can always zoom back out.
Gotcha. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Kabir. I think we can start wrapping this up.
I'm down.
Because we can keep on going
I
forever.
can go forever.
I know.
No, I'm good.
I know. Yeah. So if people want to, find you or hit you up, what would be the best way to do that?
Two ways. One, just Instagram me at Kabir Bath. I do have like a site that has a newsletter and stuff, kaboomkids.com. If you want to connect with me, I have a newsletter. I send out stuff, free resources, whatever. It's probably a good place. But Instagram, if you just want to talk and shoot shit, that's the way.
Nice, man. Awesome. Thank you. That was an amazing conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Minju. You're the man.
Right. Yeah. And then we'll see you guys next time.
Perfect.
Dude, that was fucking great, man.
Nice. Thank you.
Sweet.